The following program is sponsored by CBN.
Coming up.
And I felt like I had bumped into something.
Face to face with a hungry shark.
I remember the sound of me screaming through the snorkel tube.
One swimmer has to fight for her life.
He had my whole arm in his mouth.
Against one of nature's greatest predators.
And I see blood everywhere, all around her.
Our week of prayer continues.
And I remember thinking, no, I'm not going to die here.
On today's 700 Club.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. Well, they say it's the battleground of the future, and it looks like the North Koreans, despite the fact they're going to have a summit with President Trump, are using their technology to hack into all the installations of the United States, power grids, banks, all kinds of special reports. And they're going after businesses from Asia to Turkey. And what are we going to do about it? That's the question. Terry?
Well, and that news comes as the Senate is set to confirm President Trump's nominee for Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, just a few weeks before the president's going to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Gary Lane has the story.
Only 4 Democrats said they would join Republicans in supporting Mike Pompeo's confirmation. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wanted more Democratic votes, but along with all Republicans supporting the president's nominee, he now has the numbers to make Pompeo the next Secretary of State.
I mean, who would argue that Mike Pompeo is not totally qualified to be Secretary of State?
But argue they did. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee recommended confirmation by only 1 vote. Democrats like Senator Cory Booker suggested what critics called a religious litmus test for the nominee, questioning Pompeo's deeply held Christian beliefs and past comments he made opposing same-sex marriage. After meeting with Pompeo, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer led the charge against his confirmation.
I said, now that you're Secretary of State, you're in a different position. Would you walk back some of the really nasty comments that he has made about Muslim Americans or people from South Asia? He demurred. I am voting no for those reasons.
Republicans argued Pompeo has a stellar record and is key to continuing talks with North Korea. Over Easter weekend, he held secret negotiations with Kim Jong-un, paving the way for the possible denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. And as Kim Jong-un meets with South Korean President Moon, there's a new disturbing revelation. Cybersecurity experts say North Korea may have been behind the cyber attack of a Turkish bank last month. They say Operation Go Secret is a global data theft campaign, much bigger than originally thought. They believe North Korean hackers have gone after targets in 17 countries, including the U.S., and have stolen more than just military secrets. The data theft involves infrastructure, healthcare, and telecommunication industries. In 2016, I discussed cybersecurity with then-Congressman Mike Pompeo.
I think most Americans would assume that our government is protecting us from these potential cyber attacks, but you suggested we're not even there yet.
All of our intelligence agencies, our Department of Defense are all working to meet this threat. But it's a fast-moving world. It's a place where offense is easier than defense, and keeping up with the next innovation in cyber warfare is an enormous challenge.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Well, as I've said on this program many times, the United States has the most sophisticated cyber warfare capability of any nation on earth. And it's time we turn it loose on countries like North Korea. We can shut them down. The NSA has the ability to do that. And the question is, are we going to use that capability or not? I'm sure we're trying to, but we haven't just aimed, laser-like at the North Koreans, and we can do that and literally shut their country down. But, of course, the president is trying to make nice with Kim Jong-un, and we'll see what happens to that. But I want to say also, this is such an important field of study, and we have at Regent University courses now in cybersecurity, including a certificate of somebody who is a cybersecurity expert and can go to work in that field. So we have several hundred people already taking courses at Regent University. And that telephone number, by the way, if you're interested in a degree or some study in cyber, it's 866-910-7615. That's Regent, and you can learn how to become a cybersecurity specialist or to get a master's degree, even a doctorate in cyber in a very sophisticated, I might say, we've got a cyber range that is it's probably the most sophisticated of any university in America. So it's available, and we're training the corporate leaders of a number of corporations, and the Defense Department and the Navy and others are very interested in having their officials trained at Regent University. Well, in other news, President Trump may be gaining a Secretary of State, but he's lost his nominee to head up the Veterans Administration. Wendy Griffith has that.
That's right, Pat. White House Dr. Ronny Jackson withdrew from consideration to be the Secretary of Veterans Affairs early today. Jackson had faced a growing number of accusations in recent days about his behavior in the workplace, including recklessly providing drugs and being drunk. Jackson says he didn't think he needed to respond to baseless and anonymous attacks on his character. Both Democrats and Republicans had questioned whether or not he had the experience to head up the VA, which has 360,000 employees. An American pastor is facing charges of terrorism in Turkey, but his supporters say he's simply being used as a political pawn. They say Turkey has stacked the deck against Andrew Brunson. But as Jennifer Wishon reports, U.S. Congress is ready to punch back.
On May 7th, Pastor Andrew Brunson is condemned once again to the notorious prison where he began his 18-month detention, the place where he lost 50 pounds.
He can never leave his cell, ever. Not to eat, not to go to the restroom, not to get some fresh air.
Christina Arriaga is one of just a few people who've seen Brunson. Despite severe overcrowding, he's isolated as the only Christian and speaks limited Turkish.
They're doing their prayers all the time so he doesn't sleep. He's anxious, he's nervous.
Now his Turkish attorney, who could be jailed himself, is facing a near impossible task.
They fabricate evidence. They have these secret witnesses that fabricate testimony, and it really puts you in a poor position to provide any kind of defense.
Pastor Brunson has no opportunity of a free and fair trial in Turkey. He is already smeared and condemned in Turkey's pro-government media. He has no attorney-client privilege.
Aykan Erdemir is a former member of Turkey's parliament. He says what's happening to Brunson reads like a science fiction novel. At his trial, Brunson spent hours defending himself against the most ludicrous charges. Brunson's defenders say his detention has nothing to do with the bogus charges against him. They contend he's a pawn for Turkish President Erdogan, who's holding him hostage to pressure the U.S. into extraditing several Turkish nationals and to settle his own paranoia following a failed coup attempt 2 years ago.
At the center of his paranoia is his fixation with the West and what he sees as the Judeo-Christian civilization. So this is part of his crusade against the West.
Now that Turkey's court has had a chance to do the right thing, bipartisan members of Congress are pursuing sanctions against Turkish officials who participate in the detainment of innocent American citizens. Since actions against Pastor Brunson and other Americans, they say, qualify as hostage-taking. Under Turkish law, Brunson could languish in prison for 7 years before courts take any action. If convicted, the 50-year-old father of 3 faces a sentence of 35 years. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Pat, even if Congress takes action, do you think it'll help?
It's bound to help because I tell you, Turkey is part of NATO. I mean, we're, have given them the privileges of all the free markets of the world. And what we've got in Turkey now is a Muslim dictatorship. And Erdogan has taken what was a democratic nation and a strong ally of the United States and of Western Europe, and it's turned it into a Muslim nightmare. And I just think it's time that the United States act against it. They can't continue, but unfortunately we have a base in Incirlik in Turkey, and the Turks have been important allies, and we need their support in some of the action we have to take in the Middle East. But nevertheless, we can't allow this man to do what he's doing with that pastor. And American citizens have to have the thought that they're sacrosanct when they get overseas. We cannot allow foreign governments to mistreat our citizens. If we do, there's no safety for any of them. And so I think there's something that we have to deal. If you can't deal against Erdogan himself, then go after certain of his officials. And I think that's the way to hurt them. Take away their privileges with banking, take away their privileges of travel and things like that, and all of a sudden you begin to gain some points. I got to know a man named Rudy Giuliani back in the presidential campaign, the last one. He was a leading contender for the Republican nomination, but of course that went to Donald Trump. But he is a former U.S. attorney. He's a former mayor and a very strong lawyer. He's been added to the defense team of the president. And, well, here's Wendy with more about what he's doing.
That's right, Pat. Rudy Giuliani met with special counsel Robert Mueller Tuesday. Giuliani is President Trump's new personal lawyer handling Mueller's probe into Russian interference in the 2016 election. The Washington Post reports the two men discussed the possibility of Mueller interviewing the president. Giuliani says the president is resisting that idea, but isn't ruling it out. Giuliani is hoping to wrap up the Russia probe as soon as possible, and President Trump said this morning he has decided not to be involved in the Justice Department Russia probe, but added he could change his mind. Well, if you want to help your brain, try eating dark chocolate. Two new small studies found that it can improve your memory and thinking abilities. It can also reduce stress and inflammation and even improve your mood. The studies from Loma Linda University in California use dark chocolate with a high concentration of cocoa, 70%. And I can definitely testify that it improves my mood. Does it improve your mood, Pat?
Well, I don't know about my mood, but it's really good for you. My blood pressure is really, really low, and it's low in a good sense. But this stuff is good to remove inflammation and to open up your arteries and enhance your cognition. But I believe in 72% cocoa or higher concentrations. They call that dark chocolate. Milk chocolate has got a lot of sugar in it. It doesn't do you much good. But the dark chocolate is good. Do you use that?
I don't use it often, but do you? Do you eat it regularly?
Well, I used to be able to get whole cases of those bars that were 72%. Now they don't sell them. The Vitamin Shop stopped selling them, and they're hard to get, but they are available in grocery stores, at least like Whole Foods and others. But yes, I have. People have been kind enough to send me some dark chocolate, and I use it quite frequently.
Good for you.
It's very good for you. Okay.
Well, we celebrated Earth Day earlier this week, and there have been no shortage of reports about the dire status of our planet. Coming up, one best-selling author separates the fact from the fiction of these doomsday stories. Mark Morano opens up his politically incorrect guide to climate change, and that's next.
Well, we've had a long winter. We've had record snowstorms, record cold, record hurricanes. It's just unbelievable. But most of the establishment media has continued to say, well, it's actually caused by global warming, except they now call it not global warming, but climate change. But how much do they really know about this threat?
This was the Midwest a few weeks ago. Another blizzard. After a brutal winter, a cold and snowy spring. Climate scientists used to say winters would be a thing of the past because of climate change. Now they say it's making them worse. They also blame climate change for war, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, and even a decline in mental health. The world now spends $1 billion a day to keep the Earth from warming. Al Gore says the Earth is like a sick child that has a fever. And we're told that 97% of scientists believe climate change is happening. But is it? In his best-selling book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, climate skeptic Marc Morano shares the facts you haven't been told and argues that the bad news about the Earth's climate is wrong.
Well, this is an intriguing title. It's called A Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. I thought it'd be something I'd be glad to get hold of. It's fascinating. And the author of it is Marc Morano. He's joining us. He's with something called Climate Depot. Marc, it's good to have you with us.
Hey,
thanks.
Thank you, Pat. Happy to be here. Appreciate it.
You've been called everything, MF and all the dirty words you can think of. You've been vilified around the country. Why?
Because I've committed heresy in their minds. I've stood up to the United Nations and Al Gore and challenged their doctrine of man-made climate change. And that's what they do. They intimidate, threaten.
Down the road, say 20 years from now, is Miami going to be underwater? Is Hawaii going to be underwater? Is the New York, the streets of Manhattan going to be flooded? What's coming off?
Well, what's coming on is in the book, I actually detail peer-reviewed studies showing that there's been no acceleration in sea level. And Al Gore in his film shows that, Florida's half underwater, not just Miami. Miami is actually sinking. It's called subsidence. But there's no acceleration in the global sea level, so you cannot link that to mankind is always battling the shores. Sea levels have been rising for 10,000 plus years since the end of the last ice age. And for right now, for Gore to come up with all these future scare scenarios and get people terrified when there's no scientific basis right now for that at all, that's one of the cons, is what I call this, in this climate debate. They scare people. And when current reality fails to scare them, whether it's temperature, polar bears, sea level, they make scarier and scarier predictions of the future so they can try to get up support.
What is the ultimate game? Is it some kind of a power play to take over the world economy? Is that what it is?
Well, since the 1960s, the modern environmental movement has been essentially hijacked by the left. And what they've tried to do, and in the book I go back to the 1960s and 70s to the other environmental scares, things like resource scarcity, we're going to run out of food, we're going to have famines, we're going to have overpopulation, there's too many people, the global cooling scare. Mm-hmm. And I show that those scares all had the same solutions they're proposing today. It was a different environmental scare, same solution. And the solutions are centralized planning, wealth redistribution, mm-hmm. and sovereignty-threatening international organizations. And the UN is very open. Environmental climate policy isn't about the environment. We want to redistribute wealth by climate policy. They openly call for global governance. So they're just using global warming as the latest environmental scare in order to achieve that agenda.
Well, what about that Paris Accord when the president came out of that one? What is it they wanted to do in that accord?
Well, that has been now analyzed, and it's the most expensive treaty in world history. $100 trillion is the estimated cost. We're already spending $1 trillion a day.
Trillion?
That's the estimate by Bjørn Lomborg, a Danish statistician, looking at this, and it would achieve nothing. And here's the thing: not only would it cost money, not only would it commit nations to lose sovereignty and start being essentially having to bow to a UN international organization, but it would have, even if you had trusted the UN science and Al Gore believed everything they said, it would have no impact on temperatures 100 years from now. So it's all a massive bureaucratic wealth redistribution scheme to do nothing for the climate if, in fact, we actually faced a crisis. I like to say that this is no more than medieval witchcraft. People believe that the United Nations and the United States EPA can regulate the temperature and control storminess. They used to believe that in the Middle Ages. Those witches can control weather. Those witches are causing crop failure. Now they're blaming our SUVs and our cars.
Well, you also point out in the book a number of hypocrites who are leading the charge. And you mentioned my friend Al Gore as a principal polluter. What does he do?
Al Gore, and this is part of the problem, is the public hasn't bought this. According to Gallup polling, there's no change in concern, essentially, from global warming from the 1980s to now. And one of the reasons is people like Al Gore don't follow their own advice. He lives with multiple homes, private jets, huge carbon footprint, but he preaches to everyone else that we should be, taking baths together to save water, that we should be biking to work, that we should be, watching every little bit of our carbon footprint. He himself is unwilling to do it. That tells the public that this is nonsense, that the people who are trying to do this scare aren't living the way they are claiming to.
Talked about Arnold Schwarzenegger flying a jet between L.A. and Sacramento.
Daily commuting.
Is that right?
Yeah, he daily commuted to the governor's mansion. At the same time, he went to have a trial to try the oil companies for murder. And then while he's calling for a trial to prosecute the oil companies, he's promoting helicopter rides. He also drove a Humvee. But at the same time, at the governor's mansion, he urged California residents to air dry their clothes on clotheslines. And meanwhile, no one saw his underwear hanging on a clothesline at the governor's mansion, but they did see him commuting by private jet. This is that old, it's almost like the Soviet Politburo. You have one standard for the party insiders. Yeah. You can live in lavish, and then the masses have to follow all the rules and regulations, and they have to be kept in check. And that's basically what we have, whether it's Leonardo DiCaprio, the UN top official from the climate panel, said he lived at 30,000 feet. He flew all the time to all these exotic conferences of the United Nations, but they preach everyone else has to follow their strict rules.
Is there a possibility of a major ice age coming? I mean, rather than this warming stuff, the planet may be getting cooler?
Yes. In fact, many scientists, including Russian scientists, solar scientists, are predicting a coming cooling. But here's the thing. It's not about whether it's carbon dioxide or whether it's even the sun. In the book, I detail and I interview Nobel Prize-winning scientists and Princeton physicists and former United Nations scientists who turned against the UN. It's quite literally hundreds of factors that influence the climate. Mm-hmm. So right now they're trying to analyze what's going on. By some estimates, we're at 100-year or more sunspot low activity. And many people are predicting a coming cooling. Just the last 2 years have seen a significant drop in temperature since the height of the last ocean cycle of El Nino. So yes, global cooling is possible. Don't know how severe it's going to be. They always say prediction is very hard, especially about the future. And so I don't like to get into predicting in this game, but we do know that nothing unusual is happening, whether it's hurricanes, floods, tornadoes. Extreme weather is actually on a stable or declining trend on climate timescale.
It comes out of the sun, doesn't it? I mean, and that has nothing to do with SUVs.
That's right.
Yeah, really?
Yes, and one of the things I detail in the book is we had the medieval warm period from about 900 to 1300 AD. This was considered the climate optimum. That was the word was optimum. And we had the Renaissance. We had all this crops and vineyards growing, and England had booming production. And then in recent times, they said we have to get rid, UN scientists said we have to get rid of the medieval warm period because we didn't have coal plants and SUVs, and it was inconvenient to explain how something could be as warm or warmer than today. So they went back in the data and they erased the medieval warm period. They erased the 1930s in the United States as the hottest decade. They went back and cooled the past, all to show as a campaign cause that the temperatures are allegedly unprecedented today.
So you're saying they're lying about the stats?
I'm saying, here's what I'm saying. It's hard to say that because the individual scientists will look at science and they'll say, oh, all these scientists can't be in on some big con, right? But if you study butterflies and no one's paying attention, but you say, how will climate change 50 to 100 years affect the butterfly? And you come up with a bunch of predictions. Mm-hmm. You haven't done anything wrong. You're just using models. And you say, oh, the butterfly could be greatly affected or it could not be. Well, the media is going to seize on, oh, the butterfly could be doomed. Your university is going to like it. You're going to get funding. You're going to get more study. You're going to get university staff. All of a sudden, you're part of this alleged phony 97% consensus. So it's not that they're lying. It's that they're crafting a narrative. And this is what it is. It's like a campaign cause. They squash anything negative and they promote only that which fits their narrative.
We had a recent president, who said global warming was the greatest threat facing civilization, didn't he?
And it's a tragedy that there wasn't enough pushback on President Obama for saying that. It's the greatest threat we face. It is changing climate is in the history of the Earth. Right now, we're in probably the 10% coldest period in the Earth's geologic history. In other words, 90% of the Earth has been warmer than today. We have not had it where we could have ice at both poles like we do now. So geologically speaking, nothing unusual is going on. So for President Obama to say that is beyond science. That's becoming a religious belief. And by the way, the head of the UN climate panel actually said, and I'm not making this up, global warming is my religion. Quote. That's his exact quote. This was the guy in charge of deciding how these big authoritative reports that John Kerry, our former Secretary of State, liked to call the gold standard, run by essentially a climate religious advocate doing this.
Let me ask you, what about the Antarctic? What's happening down there at the southern pole, by the way?
Yes. Now, in the ice, in Antarctica, the South Pole, NASA study shows it's actually growing. The ice, the land-based glacier ice, has been expanding, and it's contributing to a sea level lowering. In other words, it's actually growing so much, and it's actually been through a cooling phase. Now, the Arctic, people will say, oh, well, he's not talking about the Arctic. Well, the Arctic at the North Pole, there's studies showing that the 1920s, 30s may have had a similar amounts of ice, that it's very cyclical. And keep in mind, they put in satellites, started monitoring the Arctic back in the 1970s when we were going through the global cooling phase. So it's not unreasonable to say the Arctic has warmed since everyone was worried about a coming ice age and global cooling in the 1970s.
Have you had death threats?
Yes, I've had, and actually detail that in the book, and actually just got one the other day with death wishes and death threats and threats against me and my family. This is how they operate. They try to silence, intimidate, and I go through, it's not me, it's the scientists who are actually battling this issue. Their careers have been ruined, their universities, they've lost jobs, they've lost funding, they've lost prestige, all because they stand up to this alleged science issue. And I say alleged because it's treated more as a religious issue.
It's incredible. But have they sold it to the general public or not?
They haven't. Polling data still shows global warming ranks, 19, 20 out of the top 20 issues. The problem is they have sold it to kids. And one of the things I spend a lot of time on in the book is the indoctrination of children, Pat. From kindergarten through college, children are being indoctrinated from day one on we're all going to die. Our modern way of living is destroying the earth. And I actually interviewed college students when I was in South Africa at a UN climate summit. And they actually said that the American way of life is total BS, and that the poor people in the developing world, people who don't have running water and electricity, are the ones living earth-friendly. I featured California Governor Jerry Brown saying that the Africa can't emulate the United States wealth because the earth can't handle it. And this is where you get to the sinister agenda, because Al Gore, I also feature him saying that we need ubiquitous fertility management. In other words, we need to prevent the number of Africans, because he says Africa is projected to have a huge population increase. A white, wealthy Western politician telling at a Bill Gates function, televised, that we have too many people of color in the developing world and we need fertility management to prevent that. He gets away with it.
He said that?
It's in the book. And I have the video as well. He says we need ubiquitous fertility management because the world is projected, Africa is projected to have so many people.
He would be condemned as an absolute racist. I mean, that's the most racist thing you could possibly imagine.
But this is how it is. And sadly and unfortunately, Pope Francis has lined himself with advisors that have a similar mindset. He's done very anti-Catholic doctrine with his advisors. There are people who believe that, overpopulation and fertility management and family planning and international agencies and all sorts of things the Catholic Church preaches against. He's allowed the Catholic Church now to align themselves, what I call an unholy alliance. And it's continuing, though. So it's infecting all parts of our culture, but particularly children. And I always say every parent or grandparent of a kid needs to have this book because it's the ultimate reference book to push back against teachers and schools.
It's the most frightening thing that this becomes a religion, that people will be destroyed if they go against that religion, and their lives will be threatened. I mean, death threats.
Yes, but that's been the case for years, and this has been. It's gone from science to dogma.
Yeah.
And Al Gore claimed back in the early 90s that there were no science, that all scientists agreed. Now, this 97%, I point out in the book, in one of the studies, wasn't even 97 scientists. They actually had 77 scientists, anonymous, we don't know who they are, and they claimed a 97% consensus. And a UN scientist said the 97% claim was pulled out of thin air. They used that to bully people. In other words, you don't know enough about science, you can't challenge it. It's like the old toothpaste ads. 4 out of 5 dentists recommend this, or the Dentyne gum ads. Yeah. They're trying to use that to intimidate. Who are you to question all these scientists? Well, it's actually, I point out, a core of activist UN scientists, people like Michael Oppenheimer, who took money from Barbara Streisand, $250,000, who work for activist environmental groups. And many of these groups, United Union of Concerned Scientists or active environmental groups, they work for the federal government and they do reports that sound like they're written by Greenpeace. And many of them are written by Greenpeace, but they have the federal government stamp on them. This is how they've co-opted science and turned this into a quasi-religion and a intimidation effort where you cannot dissent.
Is Mars getting cooler? There's one of those planets who's getting cooler. There weren't any SUVs.
It was Mars getting warmer is what people. But that, you know, we don't get
Mars
too much.
is getting more.
Mars has a different atmosphere, and so once you get into studying other planets and the impact, you know, each atmosphere of each planet is very different. But it's a point. You just look at all you have to do is look at the Earth's history. And one of the scientists, a Princeton physicist, I point out in the book, he says we're currently in a carbon dioxide famine on Earth. In other words, this is one of the lowest levels of carbon dioxide we've had. We've had ice ages with many times higher carbon dioxide. So this whole idea that the public is in a panic, it's not about science. It's literally about their agenda. And that's what I point out in the book. When I interviewed the UN climate chief, she said, Cristina Figueres, we seek a centralized transformation that will make life on planet Earth very different. That's the UN climate chief. She's now a step down, but that was her goal.
Centralized transformation.
Centralized transformation that will make life very different. Do we really want our life very different and run by the United Nations? People need to wake up. And fortunately, President Trump, and you see the attacks he's under with all the daily attacks, and his EPA chief, the same thing, Scott Pruitt.
Yeah.
He has committed heresy in Washington. He's done what no other Republican EPA chief has done. And I'll repeat that. Scott Pruitt, Donald Trump's EPA chief, has done what no other Republican EPA chief. He's stood up to the climate change establishment. George W. Bush appointees didn't do it. And George H.W. Bush appointees didn't do it. He's done it, and they are going after him, filing through 20-year-old real estate deals. They are trying to get rid of him because he had the audacity to try to actually fulfill Donald Trump's campaign promises on climate, which they cannot fathom in Washington.
I hope. Has your book been successful? I think it probably has.
Yes, it's been ranked an Amazon bestseller. It's actually in its third printing, and it's been sold out for a while at Walmart and Amazon, but now it's back in stock, and we're really, and I just presented it to the EPA chief this week, so
good for you.
I'm hoping this gets some traction inside the Trump administration.
It's fascinating. Climate change, the politically incorrect guide. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to resist this stuff. I mean, I believe in the biblical religion, but I think these phony religions based on one world government and the control of human beings by a centralized authority is just not what we want. And if it's being sold under the guise of climate change, we've got to do something about it. So good to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pat. I appreciate it.
God bless you.
Thank you.
All right. Terry, how about that? Get rid of your SUV and get rid of that jet you're flying in.
I think I'm going to hang on to the SUV. The jet's been gone for a long time. Well, up next, a mother of three feels something bump into her while snorkeling in the water, then turns to see the black, beady eyes of a shark and its razor-sharp teeth chomping at her arm.
When I yanked the last time, his jaws opened up, and I remember when my arm popped out, I looked at it and I was just in shock because it was completely gone.
Save her life. Plus, we'll be praying for you, so don't go away. We'll be back. Well, we are in day 4 of our annual week of prayer, and if you want someone from the staff of CBN to pray for you, give us a call. Our number's toll free. It's 1-800-700-7000. We're going to be praying for you every day on this program, as well as during our chapels at noon Eastern Time. We'd like to share with you some of the highlights from yesterday's service with our guest, megachurch pastor Rusty George. Take a look.
We compare blessings. We are so good at counting the blessings of other people, but so bad at counting the blessings of ourselves. And the fastest way to kill something good in your life is to compare it to something else. You feel better than somebody else or less than somebody else. Not only does it not glorify God, it short circuits your prayer life. I just sense God say to me, I'm trying to do something with you. And I can't do that through you if you're trying to be somebody else. What is that to you? If they succeed or if they appear to fail, you must follow me.
Well, we have had wonderful guests so far this week, and we want to invite you to join us each day for chapel at noon Eastern Time. All you have to do is log on to cbn.com. Today's featured speaker is our very own Pat Robertson, so be sure to join us for that. We look forward to that.
I'm going to talk about the 8 I wills of God.
Yay.
Yeah.
We'll be there.
You'll be there.
You'll be there too.
All right.
Well, here's the story that'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Tiffany Johnson's day began with parasailing over the Bahamas. It ended with an emergency medevac back to the States. That's because Tiffany's dream vacation was interrupted after being attacked by a shark.
Tiffany Johnson and her husband JJ were enjoying a day of snorkeling while on a cruise, but he started feeling sick and headed back to the boat.
In the meantime, my wife is just out there snorkeling by herself. Never thought that she was in any kind of danger.
But in these waters, danger is always close by.
And I felt like I had bumped into something. I was face to face with the shark. He had my whole arm in his mouth. I remember the sound of me screaming through the snorkel tube.
Tiffany was in a fight for her life.
I felt the strength of the Lord just come out from inside of me and give me the strength to fight. And I remember thinking, no, I'm not gonna die here. You are not gonna take my life. So I started to yank harder. When I yanked the last time, his jaws opened up. And I remember when my arm popped out, I looked at it and I was just in shock because it was completely gone.
That's when I hear Tiff scream. And she screamed, help me, Jesus. And I remember looking at her, half of her right arm was gone. And it's just mangled, mangled stump. And I see blood everywhere, all around her. I screamed baby, and I jumped off the boat after her. And the first thing that I heard her doing was praying.
The boat's captain threw out a rope, and JJ and Tiffany pulled themselves in.
The moment I hit that boat, the peace of the Lord was so strong. It was like a tangible cloud, a presence that I have never felt before.
As the boat sped back towards the dock, JJ made a tourniquet out of a towel, trying to stem the flow of blood from Tiffany's arm.
I just laid my head on his lap and I just began to pray in the Holy Spirit, praying for my husband to give him strength. And I prayed for my kids. I prayed in that boat that God would use this for his glory.
That was the only time that I felt like, oh my gosh, my wife could die on me.
Once back on shore, they called an ambulance. Tiffany was rushed to the Nassau hospital and taken into surgery.
I remember making phone calls to her immediate family, my immediate family, telling them what happened, just to pray for her. So I was just praying that the Lord would just heal my wife, that she would be okay, that she was going to make it through this.
The surgery lasted 4 hours, but it wasn't over.
After the surgery, the doctor approached me and told me, Mr. Johnson, your wife, she's stable and we stopped the bleeding, but she needs to see an American doctor as soon as possible.
Without proper and immediate care, Tiffany could lose what was left of her arm, or worse, develop a life-threatening infection.
But they really just did not have the resources like we do here. And so I was in a lot of pain.
But getting back to America wasn't so easy.
We knew that we needed an act of God and a miracle for us to get back.
Their only option was to hire a medevac crew that would fly them from Nassau back to the States.
It cost $16,000 for the medevac flight.
The medevac company told JJ, if we don't get this pre-approved, chances are it's going to be an out-of-pocket expense.
JJ was more than willing to pay, but the couple still prayed for another miracle. 2 hours later, they got a call from the medevac company.
You don't have to worry about one penny of it. We'll take care of it. And I remember JJ hanging up on the phone and just bawling.
Less than 24 hours later, Tiffany and JJ landed in Charlotte, where an ambulance was waiting.
It's just and incredible. Just to see how God moved the mountains for us to get back home. And we didn't waver on our faith. We just knew that he was going to come through.
Tiffany never fought infection and had 2 more successful surgeries, one of which was an innovative nerve transfer surgery that allowed her to control a prosthetic arm.
I remember tears kind of starting to roll down my cheeks as I was realizing that everyday tasks are not going to be the same. And JJ looked over at me. He's like, "It's okay. We're just going to establish our new normal now."
And they have done just that. Tiffany leads worship at church, and together she and JJ continue raising their 3 children, Kylie, Luke, and Natalie. They thank God for his faithfulness through everything.
My prayers were definitely answered, more than I could ever imagine. She's not only alive, but she's thriving. And her testimony is one that's going to last for ages.
The tears I cry are not of depression and frustration and why me. They're tears of gratitude that I'm even here. Like I shouldn't even be alive. So it's just a limb. So anytime I do get frustrated or feel like, this is just not fun, it's just a reminder that I'm here and I'm alive and God's in this and he's using it.
It's at times like this that we need to cling to the fact that God is in everything. He takes what the enemy means for evil. He takes things that happen like this tragedy, and he will work them for our good. It's a promise. We've got lots of prayer requests that have come in from all of you saying, please pray for the needs of me or my family. And we want to take some time to do that right now because prayer makes a difference.
Sure does, Terry. Here's some prayer requests that we've had. For my son to be delivered from painkiller addiction, and somebody's got liver and brain cancers, and my home would sell. It's been on the market for a couple of years, and here's an answer to prayer that has come in. This person called to request a prayer, and Terry said somebody had suffered from cancer. And I called out in prayer that somebody had been suffering with demonic harassment, and the Lord has delivered them completely from demons, and also that cancer's been healed.
Well, this is Carol, who'd been experiencing stomach issues for the past month, watching this program on April 24th. And Pat, you had a word. You said there's somebody that has a gastrointestinal problem that's bedeviling you. You're just suffering all the time, sort of a leaky gut. You need something to reach down and heal you. In the name of Jesus, right now, a creative miracle is taking place. You receive an answer. Carol received the word. She said she started to experience a burning sensation in her stomach. All discomfort has left, and she is praising the Lord.
Isn't that great?
Amazing.
All right.
Here's some prayer requests that I have, too, that a part-time job would become full-time, that a 17-year-old be healed of, 17-year marriage would be healed of pettiness and pride, and healing for a young girl after spinal surgery to correct scoliosis. So let's pray.
Father, we join together. And we pray for everybody in this audience, whoever they are, wherever they are, male, female, boy, girl, whoever, in the name of Jesus. May the touch of God be upon you now. May you have a revelation of his power. May you know the Lord. And may you know and experience his great love for you. Terry, what do you...
Someone's been in a car accident, and you were just hearing in that story the term nerve damage. You've been suffering from that, and it's changed your life. God is healing that for you right now. You're just going to begin to feel tingling come throughout your body, and you're going to be completely whole.
Fear, perfect love casts out fear. And right now, we just cast out a spirit of fear. You will not be afraid. You will not be afraid. Fear not is the word the Lord has for you. That fear is leaving right now. You can just begin to praise God. You are set free. Terry, one more.
Yes, someone else who's just got a fear that you're not enough, that you're not going to be able to handle what's happened to you. God is showing you his power. He's showing up, and everything you need is going to be provided.
Thank you. Amen.
Amen.
And amen. Let us hear from you. We love to have your prayer requests. And of course, we love to hear the answers to prayer. It's been a week of prayer. Thousands and thousands of people have been calling and writing, and we have before us all these thousands of prayer requests and answers. So what do you have?
Well, we've got some email questions for you here, Pat, and that's going to be coming up in just a moment. Robin asks, if God is in control, why do accidents happen? We'll take a shot at that and another round of your questions. Honest answers when we return.
Welcome back to the 700 Club. Germans of different faith and backgrounds came together to take a stand against anti-Semitism Wednesday. Thousands donned Jewish skullcaps to protest an anti-Semitic attack in Berlin by a migrant from Syria. Anti-Semitism has been on the rise across Europe in recent years, and thousands of Jews, mostly from France, have moved to Israel. We'll have an in-depth report on European anti-Semitism on tomorrow's 700 Club. Well, another big milestone for the Christian hit song, I Can Only Imagine. It's now the official inspirational song of the state of Oklahoma. Governor Mary Fallin recently signed that bill into law. That comes as the movie based on the song has done extraordinarily well at the box office. It's pulled in more than $79 million. That makes it the 7th highest grossing movie of the year so far, and a fantastic movie indeed. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com. Pat and Terry will be back with more of today's 700 Club right after this.
Well, we want to take some time to answer the questions you all have sent in via email. Pat, this first one comes from Robin, who says, if God is in control, why do accidents happen, such as an accidental death, or was it just that person's time?
When you read the Old Testament, the thought is that God's in control of everything. When you get to the New Testament, you realize that human will plays a large part in it. Whosoever will may come. And I think that you find that not only human free will, but also circumstances play a role, and God doesn't control. He's in charge of everything, but at the same time, he's not directly causing everything to happen in this life. I mean, he just doesn't, because he allows for free will. And human beings have free will, and he allows nature to do certain things because it has a life of its own. And that's the way God ordained the world. So I think when you look at it that way, then you say, okay, God didn't make everything happen, but they call these things acts of God. And you wonder, why do you call it an act of God? Because it's always something bad. That's an act of God. All right.
Okay, this is Zuena, who says, Pat, how do I stop feeling jealous of other people? Every time someone I know has gotten ahead of me or done something better than me, I feel very jealous. This is not a Christian feeling, and I'm tired of having it. I would like to be happy for other people because God asked us to love others. What are the ways that I can get rid of jealous feelings and start loving others and rejoicing with them when good things happen to them?
I recommend that you analyze yourself and realize how great God is and how small you are. And you need to get on your face before God and just tell him, Lord, as the man did who beat his breast and he said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And just think of yourself as a sinner. You're an unworthy sinner. You see, what's causing this jealousy is ego, because you think you're something special. And you say it's an unconscious thing, but it's there. And you think, I'm special, and therefore I should be acclaimed, I should be built up. And what you do is say, God, I'm not worthy of anything. And Jesus said, when you have done all these things, say, we are unworthy servants, we've done our duty. When you begin to look at yourself that way, then that idea of jealousy against somebody else goes away, because you in a sense, are nothing before God. He loves you, and you're a child, but at the same time, stop thinking that you're so special, and that's what causes this jealousy. All right.
Yeah, this is Elijah who says, hello, Pat. My question is, what should I do when I feel like giving up? I'm 20 years old and I want to make a difference in someone's life. I just feel inadequate and not as smart as others. I'm not that outgoing and I just don't know what to do. I feel like I was pushed through high school and I don't think I'm college ready.
Well, you know, somebody came to a minister and said, I think I have an inferiority complex. And the man said, well, I don't think you have a complex. You are inferior. I think, you know, it doesn't hurt to analyze yourself like, I'm not ready for the pros. I can't play pro football, or I can't go into the majors in baseball. And I think what you're saying is, I'm recognizing my limitations. That isn't a bad thing necessarily. But what you have to do is recognize what the Bible says. I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. And so you look to him for your strength, and you say, I can do all things through Christ. With Christ, all things are possible. And I can do all things because I'm on the shoulders of the one who controls the world. Well, we leave you with today's Power Minute from Psalm 103. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Well, we thank you for being with us, and Terry and I will tell you goodbye, and you tune on to the 700 Club tomorrow.